students and professors of Reddit, what moment made you want to rage quit college? The time that both my TI-83 Plus and my TI-89 died during a final exam. When my supervisor decided that I needed to completely rewrite my master's thesis for publication to an angle that was complete nonsense and unpublishable. I did event management at uni a few years ago. Our lecturer brought in her 8-year-old daughter, who had been a stage show once, to teach us about stage management. Almost all of the class didn't turn up to the next lecture in protest. I tanked my GPA due to missing half a semester for a health issue. I was allowed to appeal to the dean and basically get my grades tossed. I would have been out the tuition, but my GPA would have survived. However, I had to have all my professors sign off that they agreed the appeal was justified. One professor refused to agree on the appeal and I wasn't allowed to turn it in. I missed a quiz due to a medical emergency and had the documentation of my ER visit and everything. I emailed my TA. Our quizzes were during discussion sections led by our TAs about making up the quiz. The TA told me to email the professor because it's his class policies. I emailed the professor, who then told me to email the TA because the TA is the one who administered the quiz. I was fairly confident about a final exam I had taken. But when I checked my grade, it was a 56. I spoke to the professor and asked him to take a second look, but he refused and said it was obvious that I just hadn't put in the effort. I finally convinced him to recheck it, and it turned out that only one side of my answer sheet had been scanned. My actual grade was a 94. Thankfully he changed my grade to the correct score, but it was still frustrating. Got a failing score on a lab report even though me and the rest of the group thought we did everything in the rubric. We went to our TA's office hours later to ask about the score. She basically reversed all subtracted points because she was taking off points for things we had done correctly. The next year one of my lab mates got a grading position with that TA. She admitted to him that halfway through the year she stopped paying attention to the reports and assigned random scores. WTF, this is a college level course for our major. You can't do that. I asked a question and the teacher ignored me. Minutes later, a different student asked the same question and the teacher said good question and answered it enthusiastically. I was docked 10% of a final essay because I had the wrong date, so it wasn't following MLA standards. I put the date I submitted instead of the date it was due. I got a 90% on the paper. There's always some dumbass in a lecture who rephrases what the prof just said and asks it as a question to sound smart. Professor, so based off X we found Y to be true. Student, so does that mean Y is true because of X? It's infuriating. Was assigned a project to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and to then write an essay on what it was like. Super weird, creepy invasion of privacy. We were supposed to either not say why we were there or to just pretend to be an alcoholic ex-alcoholic. My dad used to drink a lot and I took the assignment personally. Couldn't even look at it. A few students straight up refused to do it. I ended up giving my friend an 1/8 of weed to make up some bullet essay for me. Background: there are 2 colleges in my town. One university and one community college. I chose community college because it was cheap. English 101. Write a 3-page creative piece on why you chose this community college. So, not knowing how to stretch it's cheaper than university into 3 pages. I wrote about how I struggled with menial jobs my whole life and wanted a better future for me and my family. I was actually pretty proud of it. Classic overcoming hardship story. Teacher hands it back with a C. Says I didn't answer the question. I flipped. I circled the creative writing portion of the assignment sheet and stapled my graded paper to it and gave it to the department head and dean. The teacher was replaced mid-semester due to medical issues. I assume I wasn't the first one to complain about her. Duck her. Just recently bought a $300 loose leaf textbook for math. Now this isn't any higher level math. It's college algebra. Something everyone at my school has to take. Of course it's written by my professor. Of course it changes every year. Took it out of the shrink wrap and saw that the book was 150 pages. Leafed through it and saw that it is literally nothing. There's hardly any information. Like 2 practice problems per topic and a glossary. The real information comes from a $100 access code that has more practice problems and actual information needed to complete the class. So now I'm out $300 on a duckine paperweight and $450 on one general education class. There's nothing that can be done at this point. I can't get a refund. All I can hope for is pawning it off to some unsuspecting student for likely less than half of what I paid for. Now I'm all angry again. Duck you, Professor J. I need to go lie down. I had a professor who had serious mental issues. This guy was just a raging maniac with the scariest explosive temper. The smallest things would set him off. For instance, this one girl had a bunch of papers stacked on her desk and he asked her what it was and she politely informed him that she was a TA and they were tests that she was going to grade later. It's not like she was grading them in class. She was taking notes and being quiet. It just happened to be on her desk. He shouted at her to put it away. He would get angry when anyone asked any questions. He almost threw a chair at someone and yelled profanities. Everyone was scared of him. So myself and another student spoke to the dean under condition of anonymity since we were still in his class. The dean disclosed our names to him and our crazy prof started cold calling us and he gave me a B instead of an A even though I made an A on every test and quiz because my class participation was abysmal. Nobody wanted to speak in his class anyway. The whole thing was aggravating. There are people at the company I work for who have been fired for less. My brother is a college professor now and he says the world of academia has its share of arrogant egotistical pricks. But of course there are also nice ones. I didn't want to take a midterm in graduate school so I almost jumped in front of a Volkswagen Beetle in the parking lot. Not going fast enough to die or get injured, just get an extension. Decided against it and got my 78%. I had to write an essay about my feelings studying abroad for reflection. So obviously I made the whole essay then had to resubmit it because that is not how you should be feeling. She misspelled my name in the email. Still makes me really mad. I took a course called Companion Animals. No matter what I did I could not get less than 100% on anything. Missed a test. Makeup at home. Unsupervised. 100%. Final project completed in 15 minutes with a glue stick. Poster board and Wikipedia. 100%. It was such a joke. Granted, I thought maybe by finishing the class I could have an animal familiar like a goat or something. Never happened though. My SO is working on her masters right now, and a couple weeks ago, the professor added a ducking huge assignment that wasn't in the syllabus, and it wasn't even going to be graded. However, if they didn't do it, it was going to count against their participation grade. A few days ago, he announced that it was actually to try to teach them to stand up for themselves. He wanted the class to tell him the assignment was bullet. They all failed this little test. Usually when you take any kind of math-oriented exam, math, physics, mechanics, etc., you get a pack of problems slapped on your desk and you finish it in the time allotted. So you can generally blow through 90% of a test and get stuck on one difficult part for the remainder or just have that aha moment at the end to squeeze in a few extra points. But this one guy had the bright idea of handing out and collecting each problem at 15 minutes intervals. So once the problem was collected, that was it. Even if you figured out the mistake earlier, it was already too late. Hate the prof to this day. I'm a professor. Normally I try to be understanding if students are just taking my class because it's a requirement, so they're rusty on some things. But once when I was teaching calculus II, a student asked what's a derivative? I actually gave a very quick answer. Along the lines of a derivative is a function that measures the rate of change of another function. But come on. This is calculus II, a course that comes after calculus I, and calculus I is all about derivatives. It's like going to watch the World Series at someone's house and asking what sport is the World Series again? First day in a particular finance class senior year. Professor, who here is taking other classes? Pretty much everybody raises a hand. Professor, who here has a job? Most of the class raises a hand. Professor, well, that's a mistake because this class will take you at least 50 hours a week just to pass. I thought he was just trying to be a hard ass. Then the guy behind me confirmed that the class would indeed take that much time per week every week just to get by because it was his third time taking the class, and he was otherwise an A student. Sorry, I have bills to pay, other classes, and other responsibilities. The time does not exist to put that much time into this class. So I did rage quit, after trying desperately to get through the class for a couple of months. Every single day I want to quit. The moment I got massive weekly group assignments that were only worth between 2 and 3%, we lost half the marks on one question because that page of the PDF submission was sideways. I wish I was making this up, but in my Humanities 101 class in college, my professor made us do this online quiz. He may as well have assigned us which Gilmore Girl are you? Or what is your 80s power ballad? First day of the semester, I walk into a classroom with a professor who had uncontrollable flatulence. She lets the first on rip and all the students look at each other confused as the professor continues her lesson almost as if she hadn't noticed. This happened every 10 or 15 minutes for the next hour and a half. Fortunately for her, outside of a few chuckles, no one made a big deal out of it. Fortunately for us, she got her ass under control for the rest of the semester and we never had to deal with Vladimir Putin again. Had to give a presentation for a class. There were going to be lots of graphs and stuff, so the professor made a point of saying that we should be careful with the colors we used, because if the graphs weren't legible he would deduct points. Spent hours agonizing over color choices, because why lose points for something stupid like that? Load the presentation on the projector, and the bulb was messed up or something, so reds, and by extension, every other color, weren't showing up properly. I was looking at my screen, so I had no idea. Professor gives me his comments, and grade, lost points for the graphs being hard to read. I had to take this freshman US geography class that was like a 300-person lecture. The professor was in his 80s and tenured. He spent multiple lectures going over his evidence that global warming was a liberal hoax and that Al Gore was wrong. And since he was an academic, every slide on every PowerPoint was cited, and the most recent data he used to back up his climate change denial was from 1995. He also spent a lecture on how Costco was a Chinese company using deceptive marketing practices to appear American because he didn't realize that Costco and Costco are completely different companies. I paid to sit in that lecture. Edit. To those of you asking if it was the same class you had. Texas A&M. 2005 or 2006. Did the entire group project because the group I was assigned to neglected to do the work. Handed it in with their student cards also on it because I'd lose marks if I handed it in by myself. Bear in mind this project got a first class mark. These guys did absolutely no work towards it. Most of them didn't even turn up to meetings. Lost marks because we did a post-group work review and one of the group said I wasn't a team player or something. I was genuinely considering beating the id out of that guy and curling out a turd on his blood-soaked, twitching body, but decided to just let the pressure drop on him down the line because it wasn't worth getting kicked off the course. Karma will get that guy. Hope a ducking anvil fell on his cunty little head and broke his neck. Using my math lab usually goes something like, incorrect. Correct answer. 3x plus 5. Your answer. 3x plus 5. I once took a class called the Internet to fulfill a requirement. It taught you how to right-click, navigate to websites, and use search engines. This was in 2005. It was also an online course. That was probably the least ridiculous thing about my first college. But it only got worse. I noped out of that school after 1 year. Thank God. All of my graded work added up to an A, but the professor gave me a C because she didn't like my attitude. I went to the dean to contest the grade. He told me that he couldn't do anything about it because I would have her as a professor in the future and didn't want to make things awkward. Instead, he gave me a CD of him playing Presbyterian hymns on the trumpet and sent me on my way. I had a newly hired lecturer who was not long out of university. He was extremely condescending to anyone he perceived to be below his intelligence level, and would try and crowbar the fact he had a PhD into any lesson or conversation he could. A few of us also had marks we considered suspect compared to his favorites. After a fair few disagreements with him I dropped out, as did a couple others not long after. I'm still in contact with a couple people in the group. Turns out he was dismissed after the first year. First day. First class. Intro to programming. I'm naive AF. Class is packed to the brim with very attractive ladies. I was like hell yeah. Professor walks in, puts his stuff down, takes one look around and announces I'm going to take a wild guess that many of you are in the wrong building. This is intro to programming. A few minutes of confusion ensue. Half the class files out, including all of the very attractive ladies. All that is left is a sausage fest of sexual frustration, sweat, and a guy in a Tony the Tiger shirt eating cereal with a half-gallon of milk on his desk. Tony the Tiger boy was kicked out of school the following week for dumping 20 gigabytes, a ton in 2005 standards, of hardcore pornography onto the campus file sharing network. The IT situation at my undergrad was usually described as a lot of little fixes on an ancient set of software instead of upgrading. At some point, there was a comical little error where all campus services couldn't be accessed, but only from campus Wi-Fi. If you lived off campus, used mobile data, or could go somewhere off campus with Wi-Fi, you could get into campus services. But if you couldn't, very likely in a small town, probably only places with Wi-Fi were friends' houses, McDonald's, and Dunkin' Donuts, you were screwed. A professor got mad at us for not doing any online assignments because, well, then why aren't you contacting IT services yourselves and having them fix it? You know, like we could contact IT and everything would magically go back up and be fixed. Had a massive medical emergency, was hospitalized for a week. I was unconscious for 2 days. One of those days, 2 of my classes met. Later I email and then call my 2 professors. The first professor gets the email, emails me back her slides, her lecture notes, literally everything related to the stuff I missed. She also says that she'll send me the stuff from the next few meetings if I can't make it to them. Second professor, I might as well have used smoke signals. Didn't receive anything back. And he kept marking my missed assignments as zeros. Because I wasn't in class, I decided to drop all but one class. The one with the professor who responded to my emails. The other professors were mostly disappointed that I wouldn't be able to finish, but were very understanding about the whole situation. The second professor I emailed initially insisted that I would finish his class. I cussed him out in front of his class, went above his head, and he magically now wanted to let me drop the class. I never saw him around campus after that semester. Hearing some of the extremely dumb questions that other students have asked in upper level lectures. I'm getting a degree that puts me on par with these guys. I might as well drop out and start a business or something, because this degree must be trash. I failed a law course because my professor was a grammar Nazi. She failed everyone on their first paper, which counted towards 35% of the class. She told us we all had middle school proficiency and went on a tirade about how tough the real world is. When finals came around, me and a whole bunch kids couldn't take the pressure and bombed our last paper too. It was my 3rd year college and I thought about joining the Marines. This was 2004 during the peak of the Iraq War. Then I talked to my parents and powered through with summer courses to graduate my 4-year program. Well, now it's been 13 years and I'm reasonably well off. I also don't proofread my own it. I send it over to others to proofread. The irony.